Good evening, everyone. We're still waiting for quite a few people to come in, but we will get started. My name is Antecisa Green, and I am president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. And thank you for attending. This is our third annual Black History Month celebration, a celebration of judges. And today we have some very special guests with us. As you all know, every year the Association for the Study of African American Life and History has a theme for Black History Month as a suggestion. And this year's theme is the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity, which is why this conversation is just so important. So with that, I am going to pass it along to our moderator for the evening, Paula Edgar, who is current treasurer of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, past president of the MBBA and CEO of PGE Consulting, our own MBBA diversity, equity, inclusion guru. So Paula, please take it away.
Thank you, Anta. Hi, everyone. We are still waiting for some of the attendees to join, so I'm gonna just give it 30 more seconds because I don't want to jump into the content until we have a majority of people here. And I see lots of names that I love and cherish, and I'm happy to see you all here, and I wish we were all in the same room, but we are still in a global pandemic, and as such, you can use the chat and say hello and everything to each other and shout out your borough, say hello from the organization you're from. Let's build community via the chat. And I'll start by saying, hey, from BK. So there you go. All right, there you go. And so we're at, the numbers are still ticking up. So I just want to give it a couple seconds more and then we will start our introductions. Yeah. Good. And what I love about primarily New Yorkers is anytime you say to them, give a shout out, they will step up to the game and tell you all the things. So good. I'm really happy to see so many of you on here today. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started now. We will start with introductions, but before we do that, happy Black History Month. As Anta said, it's about the Black family, and we are all, especially now, needing to have as much family as possible. And so as you are our family, we honor that you're here today and you spent some time to take some time with us. So we are here for the MBBA and Judicial Friends presents Black Judges Matter, a discussion on judiciary and the need for Black judges within the court system. And we have some fabulous, wonderful judges who are going to be joining me in conversation today. And I'm happy to be stewarding this conversation. And we're going to start off with Judge Edwina Mendelson, who is the Deputy Chief Administrative Judge for Justice Initiatives, to introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you. As our remarkable Bronx District Attorney, my friend Darcel Clark is fond of saying, I am a daughter of the Bronx. But I've been vacationing in the town of Nyack in the 9th Judicial District for the last 3 years or so. When I talk about who I am and introducing myself, I take great pride in being a daughter of the Bronx and being a public school educated girl from New York City, all starting with elementary school through my law degree and my doctorate degree, all public school educated in New York City. And I have recently celebrated my 18th year as a judge in the state of New York. I am Deputy Chief Administrative Judge for Justice Initiatives. I've had that role for close to 4 years now. It is a statewide position. I do have offices in Manhattan, White Plains, and Albany, New York, and professional staff located in various locations throughout the state. I am not bragging, but I think it's important to say that I am the highest ranking administrative judge of color in the state of New York at this time. And our structure is one where we have our chief judge, our chief administrative judge, the administrative board consisting of the chief judge and the presiding justices of the appellate divisions, and 3 deputy chief administrative judges, 1 for trial courts in New York City, 1 for trial courts outside of New York City. Those are my colleagues, Justices Silver and Caruso, and I do have statewide authority. My heart is in the family court. I was a practitioner, a court attorney referee, judge, supervising judge, and administrative judge of New York City's family courts, but I am actually a judge now of the Court of Claims, an appointed judgeship. It is my delight to be here with you tonight and to discuss these important issues.
Thank you, Judge Mendelson. Up next, Honorable Erika Edwards, Manhattan Supreme Court Civil Term and President, Judicial Friends.
Hello, I'm Erika Edwards. I'm just a judge. Thank you. Oh, there's more? No. Yes, I am also president of Judicial Friends. I have sat in a number of courts, lower civil, lower criminal courts in Manhattan, also Supreme Criminal Term, and now I am in Supreme Civil Term. I have a regular IAS part, and I just transferred back to civil. So I guess they can't get rid of me. But it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Judge Kenneth Holder, who is the Queens County Supreme Court Criminal Term.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is, again, Ken Holder. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the MBBA putting on this program, and for Paula throwing it together so professionally. Unfortunately, Ruth Shillingford is not here. Some of you guys all know Ruth and love her. Her mom had passed away 2 days ago. Ruth is, and I've been joined at the hip for some 40 years. We both graduated from Lincoln University, same class. Of course, while we're there, Ruth was president of the student body, and I was president of the class. And we've been doing this law grind, at least for 40 years. So again, she told me to let you know that she's sorry she couldn't be here. I'm a Supreme Court judge currently sitting in Queens County. I've been sitting in this part of Queens County for 14 years. This is my 14th year. For the past 8 of my 14 years, I've been presiding in a part that primarily handles homicide cases. And the boss lady here, Justice Mendelson, ordered me most recently to become a youth court magistrate because the case I was handling happened to be a juvenile that was charged with homicide before the raise the age legislation came in place. The trial was going to happen after it had come into place. So yes, she forced me to do that. So I'm so we're doing that as well. Prior to that, I had sat in civil court for a short while, and civil court in Brooklyn. And prior to that, I was an assistant prosecutor, assistant DA here in Queens for 20 years. And for 14 of my 20 years, I was chief of the Narcotics Trials Bureau. I was responsible for handling the trials of all the narcotic cases in Queens County. And it was a shared prosecution between myself and the federal government at the borders. It was a trying time because at that time, as you well know, in the 80s, that's when crack had just hit Queens County. And we had also had the death of police officer Eddie Byrne, the assassination of Eddie Byrne. And for a law enforcement agency, the prosecutor's office, it just blew everything up because the day before police officer Byrne was killed, Queens Narcotics had maybe 100 people, officers assigned to it. The next day, 800. But what happened is that was, in my estimation, the start of the drug war in Queens and in New York City, and it continued from there. But as lawyers, we got the opportunity to try a lot of cases, and if you were on the defense side or the prosecution side, you were never wanting for cases. About 5 years before taking the bench, and while a prosecutor, I applied for and I received a grant from the federal government that awarded the court system $6 million for the implementation of Queens County's first drug treatment court, felony drug treatment court. It is still running, it's still in effect, and it is very successful. And that is my story. Oh, one last thing, since Judge Mendelson went way, way back, I was born in London, England. My mother's Jamaican, my father's Guyanese. So, that little back home story, it always comes full circle. So that's my story.
Thank you. And since we're dropping flags, my mother's from Jamaica, my father's from Barbados, and I'm from the island of Brooklyn. And for those of you who may not know me, I'm Paula Edgar. As Anta mentioned before, I am the current treasurer and past president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. I'm very happy to be joining the board of the New York City Bar this spring as well. And I am a diversity consultant, so I live with a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about in terms of inequities in different places. I'm very proud to be able to drive this conversation and really think about what we all can do collaboratively to support our judges who need our support. But before I jump into all of the details, I want to, number one, acknowledge we have a number of members of our judiciary who have joined us today, and we thank you for being here. We're happy to be doing this in collaboration with Judicial Friends. We also have elected officials, former board members of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, current board members, lots of other bar associations who are representing in the chat. So if you've not yet shouted yourself out, please do so. I can't track all the things that are happening in the chat, but I do know that we are amongst, as mentioned before, family. And as such, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for joining us for this very special Black History Month. And although we can't be together, you know that we are absolutely together, always in our hearts and always in our mission to do good together, to make the world better for all the people. So what I'm going to do before I share my screen is put in the chat a handout. So if you click on that link, you'll be directed to a handout that has the judges' bios, as well as additional resources that we'll be referring to throughout today's conversation. So that can be helpful for all of you. And now I'm going to go ahead and share the slides. I just wanted to give a little bit of a background as to where we are and what started the prompt for this conversation. So as you can see, this is the topic that we're covering today. And as Judge Holder mentioned, unfortunately, Judge Schillenford can't be with us today because she's had a death in her family, but we obviously are sending our love to her and this time, and we will drive the conversation in her honor as well. Now, 2020 brought us a lot in terms of race, social and racial injustice, the want and need for advocacy for racial justice. And when I am facilitating, I like to use this graphic because it shows that the image of George Floyd, but within the image, the faces and imagery of many other people who have been victims of violence having to do with them being Black, including Breonna Taylor, including Emmett Till, and so many, many others. And so 2020 ended up being a tipping point for us societally. And I think because we were in the middle of a global pandemic, that we had nowhere to run. People who had not been prioritizing Black lives had to sit and watch for 8 minutes and 46 seconds the murder of someone who's a member of our community, live or recorded. And that was traumatic for many of us, still is traumatic for many of us, but also traumatic for people who don't consider themselves a part of our community, the Black community or people of color. And so I say always, but I definitely say today, Black Lives Matter. And George Floyd's death, as well as everything else that happened in 2020, was a catalyst for so much movement and want to really think about what we can do in addressing systemic racism and its impact on our community. And so from that came a lot of advocacy. And so here from this advocacy, I thought it would be helpful to look at some of the statistics that exist in terms of the numbers of people, population by race, versus the judiciary in New York State, and the need for us to really have the conversation that we're having right now. As you can see here, the population is 63.20% white. The judiciary in New York State, 76.30% white. This, all the statistics I've provided to you in the chat that I just sent you the link on. The link to that is there, but it's from the Latinos, Hispanics in the New York State court system report that was created. Asian American population is 8.60%, for the judiciary 2.70. Black people 15.9%, judiciary 13.70. Native American less than 1% in terms of the population by race, 0.40%, and 0.10% in terms of judiciary. The always ominous other, not sure who that ends up being, and then Latino Hispanic population at 19.30%, and judiciary in New York State at 7.10%. So clearly there's work to be done. You may not like to look at all the actual text, but look at this graphic, which shows you exactly what I just said in graphic formation. And so I thought it would be helpful before we jump into the conversation to really lay the foundation with these images. Now it's time to jump into the conversation. And so our first question is, what is the current state of diversity in the judiciary? What is the state of the pipeline? I'm going to start with you, Judge Holder.
Well, that graphic that you showed is pretty shocking, and it's shocking when you look at it in the pie graph. But New York State judges now, I mean, 3 decades, it's more diverse now than it was 3 decades ago, but it has not kept pace with the changing demographics that we've had in the state, and that is essentially the problem. I think in 1991 there's a 22% gap between the two figures that you mentioned, the population of Black people of color, and the number of judges, and now it's 21%. So it's actually gone down by a percentage, and it is woefully inadequate. It's even just as bad on the federal side too, and it hasn't been made any better by the past administration that was just voted out of office. Most recently, the President Trump's people have replaced 6 women of color with 6 white men, and this is on the judiciary. 4 white women were replaced by 4 white men. 6 men of color were replaced by 6 white men, and 2 women of color were replaced by 2 white women. So the trend is going in a downward spiral, and obviously federal judges who are appointed for life, they're not going anywhere, and obviously because they're political appointees, they have an opportunity to really change the legal tenor of the country. Erika?
Yes, Judge Edwards.
Sure, thank you. Judge Holder is absolutely right. It's absolutely disgraceful. I know we are, at some point, I believe we're getting into a little bit about how judges become judges, whether elected or appointed. But if you look at the numbers, there are only a few areas where, it seems to be on the uptick. And one of them may be New York City Housing Court, which is considered by some to be, a lower level type of judge, but a judge nonetheless. So I don't want to, minimize it. But if you were to look at elected Supreme Court justices, particularly outside of New York City, I mean, it's disgraceful. If you look at the appointment process, the numbers are even worse. I can honestly say, though, since Jay Johnson's report and since our report, there was a gap, actually. So I don't want to take all the credit for our organization's report, but things have gotten a bit better. So by putting things on the radar, I can definitely see an improvement in terms of the numbers when it comes to diversity. And unapologetically, as Judge Mendelson likes to say, we are focused on Black folks, then Latino folks, but we also have to look at Asian folks, and they are in a much worse position when looked at the numbers in the population. So I'm an optimistic kind of person. I don't want to say gloom and doom, but we need some work. We need a lot of work. We're here to try to do it. We need to encourage folks to apply. When we talked about the worst part of it, I would have to go really to Court of Claims, which are judges who are appointed by the governor. The governor has an opportunity to appoint several judges this year. And, there are a lot of vacancies right now. I think they just told, what was it, about 6 or so? I might be off on that number, but there are certainly, there's room for improvement. And the numbers have gone up a little bit, but we were looking at, last year, we were looking at 6 out of 81 were Black judges, and that was actually up from a low of 4 just a few years ago in 2015. So out of 82 judges, there were 4 back in 2015. Now we got a couple of more, but there was so many vacancies, and from what I understand, so many applications that have been pending for so long. Our elected officials have an opportunity to really change the narrative.
Wonderful. Judge Mendelson?
Hi. I really don't have much to add to what's been said because it's really, really clear that the lack of diversity is an issue of concern. I'll just mention that the opportunity is present to make a difference in our appointed process as well as the elected process. And we did just have our beloved Juanita Bing Newton retire. She's a Court of Claims judge. She was the longest standing, I believe, in terms of tenure Court of Claims judge, and she just retired. So we do have opportunities for the appointment to that particular court, and that's the court of my court. And I'm a proud claimer, judge of the Court of Claims, but that is a governor's appointment process. In terms of diversity for the judiciary and the topic that we're talking about, there's also the opportunity to diversify leadership ranks when we are within the court system. Going to courts like the Court of Appeals or the appellate division is if one is on the Supreme Court, or the appellate term if one is on the Supreme Court, as well as judicial leadership appointments where there's a level of discretion and there can be a level of accountability as well.
Thank you, Judge Mendelson. I'm going to kick it back to you, Judge Edwards, for a conversation quickly about the pipeline. When we had our prep conversation, you were dropping bars about what to what. So I thought in our conversation that perhaps you and Judge Holder want to talk a little bit more about the pipeline itself to judiciary, and not necessarily, because I know we're going to get into the conversation about the actual processes, but what's happening in terms of the numbers and what you're seeing in terms of the literal pipeline into our profession.
So I'll tell you what, it scares me to death. And the reason I say that is because I'm looking at the number of brothers, and you know, we need all sorts of numbers, but the sisters have really been holding it down, quite frankly. And when we spoke, I'd been working on, you know, something called the books to the bar to the bench. And it was in an effort to try to increase the number of people of color, particularly Black and Latino men, and try to encourage them to consider a career in the judiciary. Everybody that I talk to seems to have an excuse, but it's so important that we encourage kids, you know, as low as grade school. I don't think it's ridiculous to start as low as, you know, third grade, fourth grade, you know, when we're able to speak, and again, in person, we can come into the schools. I could tell you, I mean, I got more props than the firemen, you know what I mean? Coming in with my robe. Kids love to see a Black judge or a person of color in a robe. They just don't get to see that all the time. They don't see it at work, thank God, most of the time. You know, they can see a fire truck drive by, a police officer or whatever, but they don't get to see us. So just putting a little something in a person, a little bug in their ear at that young age is so important. So the key is starting with undergrad, getting at least decent grades so you can get to a law school, you know, something that you can afford, whether it, you know, it be merit-based or need-based, whatever. And a law school you can afford to attend. Do well in the law school, then be able to hopefully have yourself in a financial position to take the bar, because I really think, taking a bar exam review course, because to me, that's the key, being able to take that review course, passing the bar, and then kicking butt once you're in. You know, as a member of the bar, you know, you're involved in community service activities, bar associations, you're doing well in your career, you're able to advance, and getting yourself in a position for that first 10-year period to try to really either run for a civil court judge seat or try to get appointed to criminal court or family court. Whatever you need to do, establish yourself as a member of the bar, as an upstanding attorney, upstanding member of the bar, an even better person. And then once you get in, now you can try to, obtain a position on the bench. So we talked about books to the bar to the bench in that sort of a manner. And it has to be a pipeline. MBBA has been at the forefront, as well as Judge Mendelson, as well as the Williams Commission at the forefront in hosting mentoring programs to explain to people what it takes to become a judge. I try to make sure that everybody understands, especially members of the Judicial Friends. People need to understand that we are here. You know, we're open, we're not scary type of people. We will talk to anybody. But if you don't want the truth, you may not want to speak to people about what it takes, because it's an arduous process. It's not something that you can do very easily. People say they may not be ready, or I have to do this first, I have to do that. In most cases, particularly when you're running for office, it's a multi-year process. So certainly I want to encourage everybody to consider that, and it's time.
Yes, which we're definitely going to delve into deeper later on in our conversation. I'll check in with Judge Holder or Judge Mendelson to see if there's anything you wanted to add about the pipeline piece of this, particularly student to attorney, and then, you know, we're going to talk about attorney to judge a little bit later.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Judge Holder.
Yeah, certainly. There's no question about it. I think there's an opportunity at the grade school, at the middle school level, to actually, make judges not be so frightening. I know that when you get a little further along in the process, in terms of whether or not it's the elected process or if it's the appointed process, a lot of times judges used to make trips to political clubs while they were running for office. And it was very interesting because while you're there, most of the people in the club are like 70, 80, 90 years old. So there was never an opportunity for younger folks to actually, hear what you're saying and see what you're talking about. So you essentially have to go to where they are, as Erika is talking about. And it's a very difficult process because a lot of times you might have individuals. I've spoken to lawyers who said, well, you don't make enough. Well, no, the judges' salaries have changed and they're higher. Another thing that used to stop people from considering it is, listen, while you're a lawyer, you got to do 10 years and be a lawyer in good standing, pay your taxes. There's all these weird things that actually stop people from getting, further along in the process. But I think what the MBBA is doing, what Judicial Friends is doing in terms of introducing this concept that we need judges, we need people that look like us, so that when people come into the courtrooms, they recognize that, they recognize someone. It doesn't mean everything's going to go your way, but it's not such a frightening place. So it's something to consider.
Wonderful. Judge Mendelson?
I would just add that it's there is no point where it's too early to start infusing the idea of excellence in education and preparing our children for a life that is a rewarding professional life, like the life of a lawyer and or a judge. The City Bar Association, Paula, is an incoming board member, has, I believe it was Roger Maldonado under his presidency that he first began the idea of a true civics education in the elementary schools, connecting lawyers with children as part of the pipeline. I really do believe the pipeline needs to start at the earliest opportunity.
The one last thing, you have a lot of colleges now that recognize that it's difficult for people of color to actually make the grades that you need to actually get in some of these schools. And some of these schools are becoming test optional, meaning that you do not have to take an SAT or an ACT exam to get in. And they're finding that, notwithstanding that, the number of people of color who come into the school has increased, and it has not affected the graduation rate at all. Matter of fact, it's going up. So it's very possible.
Well, we know that testing is one of the places in which systemic racism rears its very, very ugly head and has a disparate impact on people of color. So to your point, them seeing that has been a barrier to access and lowering that barrier in order to allow, Black people and people of color who are obviously well able to do the work from having one of those barriers, I think makes sense in terms of a place of access. Judge Edwards, I see you came off of mute. You had something that you want to add.
I do. So I did want to say, when we look back at the law schools, when I was doing a little bit of research on it, I was so disappointed to see the numbers of Black men and Latino men who are actually in law school compared to what I was hoping. And one thing that shocked me, since we were repping people earlier, I was trying to be a little brief with the intro, but I'd like to say hello to my fellow law school bisons from Howard University. But Howard University School of Law, it was troubling when I saw it was about 2 to 3 when the women outnumbered the men. And now we're just really talking about Black law students when they put that in that category. So when you think about what's coming down the pipeline, should we just focus on law schools? No, we have to go back, because we just don't have enough brothers in law school to now, get to be attorneys. Obviously, you can do anything after law school, but to make people consider actually being an attorney and then trying to become a judge.
Absolutely. So you're getting a lot of HU,
I know it.
In the chat. And I just wanted to add an anecdote. Judge Joanna Quinones, who's one of all of our favorites, when my daughter was very little, she asked me if do I want to bring her to the court, and I did. And she put a robe on my daughter, sitting through arraignments. And my daughter she's 16, almost 16 now. She still talks about that. And it really does make a difference when you can see yourself and see someone who looks like you in a position. we can do more. And I think that, it seems sometimes so disheartening when you look at some of the numbers that we just talked about and what we're seeing, but little impact has big impact when a lot of people do little things, right? And so I think that we should be focusing on that. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the reports, all of the reports, right? And so Judge Edwards, talk about what led to Judicial Friends creating and publishing their report in 2020. And all of you,
Sure.
I'll put it in the chat again in case you haven't gotten the link. I'll share the report again. Go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. So, the quick answer, and I'm going to give you the longer one, but the quick answer is we were asked to participate and to share our thoughts. And as a judge, that's all you have to do. When we talked about it, people may not realize, and just to by way of a background, it can be a lonely profession. There's certain things we can say, most things we can't. I could tell you most of our members were basically jumping out of our skin when George Floyd, I could say killing, I can't say murder as I am a judge and I'm impartial. When his killing occurred, it was just the straw that broke the camel's back for many of us. We can go back to Trayvon Martin, we can go back even further. So we can't speak about a lot of things in terms of current events, any open controversy, anything political, anything that could lead to a case in the future. So it's very difficult. So when we were asked within our capacities as judges to speak out, we did. Now, they may not have asked for a report, I forgot how long it is, but whatever it is, 70 something, 100 pages, they may not have asked for that, but that's what they got. And what we did was we first went through our membership as the president, as you know, Paula, you get to appoint some people to a committee. So many judges were interested, and we started with like 50 or 60 judges that wanted to get involved. We created a committee with 2 co-chairs, Judge Sylvia Hines Radix and Judge Ruth Shillingford were the co-chairs. And then we got a committee. We tried to keep it small because we knew once everybody had some input, they would have a lot to say. We ended up with subcommittees. We tried to limit it to 5 different categories because we didn't know how effective we would be if we, handled everything. And quite frankly, as I told you, Paul, I didn't want to sound cocky on this, but we really wanted to have an impact and change the world. We wanted to do something that would be beyond New York. We wanted to do something that could be, kind of like a thesis where we could just let it all out. We felt we were speaking for everybody who uses the courts, not just judges of color, all judges really, but attorneys, litigants, defendants, incarcerated or not, civil litigants, court officers, clerks, court reporters, interpreters. We just felt like we wanted to speak for everybody because people do look to us, for leadership. And a lot of times we're just not in a position to respond accordingly. So this is something we were allowed to do. And, it was actually a therapy session, because we were getting it out. I can't tell you what our drafts look like. We could have probably gone on, right, Kenny? We could have gone on for about 1,000 pages if we thought somebody would take the time to read it. And we really wanted to put it in a neutral type of position where, again, we're judges, so you can imagine what it was like to edit the styles of all of our judges, especially appellate, lower court, all kinds of writing styles. We wanted to make it one cohesive document, and we basically spent all summer, outside of our work hours, of course. And I guess the one thing is we were hoping that Secretary Johnson would be in a position to cut and paste and just rely on what we said. We wanted our numbers to be on point, our research to be on point with no issues, no credibility, nothing. Everything should have been in order, and he could have cut and pasted it.
Wonderful.
It was amazing because of the George Floyd matter. I think there was just a groundswell in all of us as to what can we do. And I think at some point someone had suggested, let's just all take a knee, statewide, and that's like, well, how are we going to do that? But it all turned around and we decided to do this report, which was the brainchild of several people. But Erika's right. In order to get that many judges together, and to coalesce all of their thinking, it was a massive undertaking, but we were able to do it and hit on so many key areas and be able to speak with one voice. And I think just to allow us to just, open up and just free ourselves and let everyone know exactly how we're thinking. I don't think people realize that it would be that expansive. And for me, it was another thing that Ruth said, help me do this. And then all of a sudden it turns out to be a really big project. So it's a wonderful undertaking, believe me.
And Paul, can I just add, we were mindful of what Secretary Johnson's charge was, and there were certain things that we wanted to talk about, but it would be inappropriate. First of all, as a judge, like for example, selective prosecution or, who's getting arrested, certain practices within the police department, things like that. So we had to really limit it to something that he would be able to act on and something that we hope that the court would be able to. So we did try to, do things like recommendations, for example, to change part rules, because we hope that somebody in Indiana or Wisconsin or Iowa, would be able to take that. And we also looked at trying to encourage participation, particularly like through trials. And one thing I must say, and I don't want to take too much time on it, but I do notice as a judge a huge difference in the type of people that come before me when I'm doing a civil trial, supreme civil term versus criminal. And spending a lot of time in criminal court, there, it's nice. It's much more diverse in terms of who can handle trials. And then when you get to supreme civil, honestly, I was shocked. And it took me a few trials to realize, I hardly saw any women. I hardly saw any people of color, who are actually trying the cases. Women, people of color were certainly handling the calendar calls, preliminary conferences, things like that. And it was so troubling. So I wanted to do something, at least do my part, to encourage speaking roles. Maybe you don't have to cross-examine the lead witness, but certainly you can do the direct of an expert, things that are already prepared and what somebody's going to say. So we wanted to do our best to try to include little paragraphs or phrases that judges all over the country would consider, denouncing racism and discrimination, but also encouraging participation from diverse groups.
But it was also interesting because we had to also consider the courtroom environment. And as Erika said, when you're in criminal court, some very unique things happen. You get attorneys who come in, Black attorneys who come in, and court officers might tell them, sit in the back until your lawyer comes. So these are things where people do not recognize you for who you are sometimes, and you may ask you to just simply move from where you're seating from. So the report could have been, as Erika said, a lot more sharp, more poignant in terms of the things that we go through on a daily basis. But we figured if it's going to be a nationwide impact that this might have, that we have to just balance off exactly what we can talk about and have people deal with the things that are most fundamental and the most at the top, the surface level, right off the bat.
Great. Before I move to Judge Mendelson, I want to give a little bit of housekeeping. So if you want to use the chat and have everybody else see what you're chatting, you have to make sure you've selected all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see. Otherwise, just the panelists will see and we're not tracking it. Well, I am when everyone else is talking, but I want to make sure that if you really want everybody to see your community, what you're saying community-wise, make sure you have all panelists and attendees selected. If you'd like to ask a question that can be responded to later on during Q&A, please put it in the Q&A portion of Zoom so that I can make sure I can track that. And with those messages, we're going back to the show. So Judge Mendelson, can you talk about the ways in which Judicial Friends' efforts and the efforts stemming from the report with Jay Johnson either align or differ, or how they supported each other?
So I will say they had different goals and purposes. But before I talk about the special advisor's report, there's a name. I keep reflecting back to the first slide you put up, which is going to make me not sleep well tonight, depicting George Floyd and others who have been harmed. There's a name that many people don't know, and I'm going to say this child's name, 16-year-old Cornelius Frederick. And for those of us who engage in the family court space, that's a Michigan youngster who was in confinement, foster care youth, who was confined and restrained for throwing a sandwich and lost his life in 2020 as well. So when we often think about the justice system's response and the justice system's responsibility when people of color die, as has George Floyd, which has spurred a lot of this, and the other names you've mentioned, it also impacts children as well. So the following in June 2020, quite frankly, on the day of George Floyd's funeral, Chief Judge DeFiore asked Secretary Johnson to conduct an equal justice review of our courts' policies and practices as they relate to issues of racial bias in the courts. And using all of the resources of that very large law firm and the resources at his disposal, Secretary Johnson interviewed, and his team interviewed, hundreds of people, former judges, court staff, public and private law practitioners, judicial associations, relying, I'm sure, and giving attribution to the judicial friends, as well as the other reports that have been submitted by other judicial associations and bar associations. And he was asked to give an honest, no holds barred assessment of how we were doing in the courts, and boy, did he. The report, which is available, it's on the court's website, and I'm sure Paula will make sure folks have access to it, is a 100-page, very painful to read report that I ask you to all read. It began with a bit of good news, and that is that there are so many who are currently in our court system working hard to get it right and make our courts better. And it started with that good news for a few sentences and then went to what Secretary Johnson referred to as the bad news, and that is our need to significantly improve on so many measures. First of all, how our overburdened high volume courts have a dehumanizing impact and experience for the people who appear in those courts. And he was referring to the criminal courts, the civil courts, and the family courts. And it is no accident that these courts are overpopulated by people of color and people who also live in and experiencing poverty and other crises. He called upon us with 13 separate recommendations that we have to find a way to fight racial intolerance within our own court family, to strengthen and support our court's commitment to diversity and meaningful inclusion. And that is in the judicial ranks, which is what we're talking about today, but also in the non-judicial professional ranks of our courts. And the need to clarify our discrimination policies and improve their enforcement. And for the court system's point of view, it was George Floyd as an impetus, but it was also a racist social media post by a court officer who has, the media reported, subsequently been terminated by our courts, that also spurred Chief Judge DeFiore to go outside. I've been in contact, I've been appointed to lead the day-to-day implementation of these recommendations for the court system, and I consider it the assignment of my life. And as part of my assignment, I have been meeting and talking with professionals from all over the country about how other court systems are trying to improve in this very area. We are unique in New York by asking an outsider to not only look at us, assess us, and tell us how we are operating, but we're also unique in insisting that an outsider also assess how we are doing. And Alfonso David has been appointed to be the official point of the official monitor of how we are doing, along with everyone in the world who is going to be an unofficial monitor of how we are doing as we try to implement these recommendations. The recommendation, Secretary Johnson's report, I am sure, relied a great deal on the Judicial Friends report, as well as a report that you've referenced earlier, that you received some of your data from the Latino Judges Association. I am sure, and because a lot that was in the report was confidential, because there was a promise of confidentiality so people could speak openly to Secretary Johnson, but I am sure there are many, many people under the sound of my voice right now that contributed to that report.
Agree. Some who are moderating the panel with you.
Some who got charged to implement it.
Right. Yes. I think, we had the opportunity as officers to speak with Jay Johnson, and just to be able to say, blah, like this is all the things that we think about this, and to know that we were having impact in having a voice is so important, and to, you know, to get from the people, about the people, to the help and support of the people is really important. Somebody put in the chat, you know, what is profound about this whole initiative is it's not just looking at the diversity of the members of the judiciary, but also of the courts themselves, right? The actual, you know, folks who are supporting and helping, you know, people navigate through the court system. And that also impacts the, you know, diversity and the experiences of everyone who is in the space. And I, you know, I talk about implicit bias and racism every single day, but when we're, you know, thinking about the distribution of justice and what that means from the moment you walk through a courtroom door until hopefully you get to leave at some point, right? Then there's bias that goes into all of our interactions. And so what is the impact of having judges who are helping to shape policy and to see and accord the different interactions within their courtrooms, whether or not there is representation amongst the staff members, but to have someone to say, like, look, this is not okay in our courtroom, or this is okay, or this is what, you know, the words that you use, etc. All those things. And when you talk about social media and the people who are supposed to be helping to advance justice, doing things that are the outside of what is expected, whether upstate or downstate, it's challenging because you know, you think about how scary it is for people to walk into a courtroom, whether it's something where they're trying to, you know, recover property or to not become property of the state, right? Like it's a hard trajectory. And so I really love the report for that, really thinking of the full experience. Judge Mendelson, you got to say something?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Judge Mendelson, and then Judge Holder. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, of course, time will not permit us at this occasion, although you can invite me back to talk more about the specific recommendations, to go into all 13 of them. But in terms of the bias training recommendation, please understand that the court system is not planning a one and done. First of all, there will be mandatory bias training for everybody, the judges, the professional staff, the court officers, but it's not going to be, it's going to be in a variety of different ways. We are going to be talking about procedural justice, that every single person needs to be treated with respect and afforded opportunities of dignity at every opportunity when they come into the court. And that's for the lawyers as well as the court users and litigants who are appearing in our courts. We're talking about training on basic customer service and how do you treat people. Training that is trauma informed, and that's critically important because sometimes people are coming into a court building and behaving in a certain way, and that makes us as clerical personnel or court officers react a certain way, not understanding that a person's life trauma and what goes on in their life outside of the courtroom directly impacts how they behave when they walk into the buildings. And we need to be educated about that as well as procedural justice every step of the way. And the same themes of training will be happening for the judges, are going to be happening for the non-judicial professional staff, and our court leaders are doing the training first.
Right. Awesome. Judge Holder?
Yeah, exactly. It's when you walk into a courthouse, what you see is so important to you. And we were talking about judges initially, but as Judge Mendelson says, you know, the court clerks, the court officers, the probation officers, you know, the staffing of this building in and of itself has so much to do with how it is that you're treated and how you feel when you walk into there. And so much of that has to do with some of the tests that are available to even get those jobs. You know, a lot of our folks don't even know when those tests are offered, where they're offered, you know, how to get any access to it. You know, that's just not a pipeline that is just prevalent within our communities. But if you go to other communities, you know, it almost goes from father to son, you know, and so it's almost expected. You're going to be a court clerk, you're going to be this, you're going to be a court officer. So seeing those people in the courthouse as either as a litigant, you know, or as a defendant coming in is very important, because as Judge Mendelson says, you know, it helps you to understand and to just break down, you know, the horror of what can be in this building for some people.
And can I just say, I was just going to say, Paula, part of it also is a mindset. And, you know, I certainly, me of all people, I appreciate court officers and the security that they provide to me and other people in our courtrooms, because at times, you know, it does get testy. and not just pre-COVID, even post-COVID in criminal court. Sometimes we have to appear in person and not everybody wants to go in, you know? So I do appreciate that, but it's changing the mindset and trying to include more customer service versus security and not having them be quasi paramilitary forces. You know, and it goes also, I mean, people have done research and it goes back to some of the times when the equipment had changed, you know, and now it's a SWAT team type of a mentality and separate, you know, units. And people were trying to understand when it became that. You know, was it 9/11 when court officers were asked to do more outside perimeter security? Was it sometime after that? Like, when did that happen? And that's also part of changing the mindset, more customer service, less, you know, paramilitary security type of a force.
Well, it's similar to the conversation that's happening about policing in general, in terms of being a community support function as opposed to, you know, military-like, in terms of the way in which justice, quotation marks, is afforded. So I'm going to just give a call to everyone else to continue to put questions in the Q&A. And I'm going to, before we get to the conversation about what are we going to do about it, how can folks support, and how to even get into the pipeline we were discussing before, I wanted to go to see, in terms of some of these questions, do you address with the court system your concerns about selective prosecutions? It wasn't specified to anyone. And so I open it to anyone who would like to respond. Judge Edwards, I saw you. Go ahead.
No, because that was
Okay.
one of those areas as a judge, you know, there's no way we can even address that
No.
and still be impartial. If somebody from, you know, the prosecution were to appear before us, we would all be recused and that would defeat the purpose of us having our positions. There's no way we are permitted to do so.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you. I think that was succinct. Okay. Okay.
Wait, one sec.
No,
But
fine.
however, as we look at each case individually, that's certainly something that could come to mind of a particular judge when they're considering the right outcome of a case.
Mhm.
An exception.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm going to jump back into our panel flow. So we heard the I won't say uninspiring, because I think it's inspiring because I'm sitting here in a panel with all of you and you're representing. We want it to be so many more of us. But the question is, how can non-members of judiciary support the efforts to advance diversity in judiciary? And I'm going to start with you, Judge Holder. Tell me all the answers. I know you have them.
Well, not non-members, you know, essentially, I think it's a community effort. That's number one. It's a community effort, and people have to decide what the outcomes are that they're trying to achieve. I know that in the area of Queens that I come from, there was a huge effort within our constituency to actually look at the criminal justice system and try to actually have, you know, young students come to the courthouse and visit there. They would come while I'm doing trials. You know, there's internships that interns that all of us judges are used to taking on. You know, taking under our wings and letting them see what's going on. A lot of us teach. We go to some of the colleges and teach at some of the as adjunct professors in order to get people's minds in a mindset where they can actually consider this. And I think that's the whole thing about it. As Erika said earlier, a lot of people don't even think that they can even achieve anything at this level, and they look at it as something that is beyond, you know, beyond their ability, and it's really not. So I think that there's an effort that people have to take to just ramp it down, and the only way that you do that is by having access. You know, there's so many people in the MBBA and Judicial Friends that all of us together, you know, going out into the communities are the ones that can, you know, make it easy to just, you know, have a gate, if you will, an opening gate for people to actually come through and say, you know what, it's not so bad, the water's warm, you can do this. And, you know, the other thing with the education side that Erika spoke about, that is clear. You're not going to get around that. You have to do that. You have to be prepared to do that. And hopefully, as Erika said, are men of color, because that's what I think is lacking here. When I look at the bench, there's so many women of color, so many Black women that are on the bench, and it's amazing, it's great. But so many of the defendants who come into my courtroom, you know, are all men. You know, they're male defendants, and they are they're shocked at what's going to go on in the courtroom. And a lot of times, if there's no one of color there, to handle the case, it's going to be a little bit of a problem in terms of how they see it. So I do think that the programs that are in place in schools, in community groups, are working towards this. And you also can't forget the fact that there's the elected process, of getting to the bench is another process, together with the appointing process, that is, trying to make it so that people understand that there's and the Court of Claims process. There's several ways to to come into this process without there being a one trick pony.
Wonderful. Judge Mendelson?
When I think of this is almost like the pipeline question again, but I also think that, when we talk about community and we talk about what others can do to support, the courts belong to the community. So there are a number of endeavors that we have, and now I'm not talking about the leader of the Equal Justice Initiative. I'm talking about my role as Deputy Chief for Justice Initiatives. We have a very robust and vibrant community outreach programming component to my office. And we have lots of court community and faith-based initiatives where we recognize that the courts belong to the community. And many of the participants who I see joining us in the chat box have been involved in our faith-based and other community outreach endeavors. And I think it's critically important that we maintain, even through this COVID crisis and beyond, we maintain our community connections. Part of one of our recommendations for implementation and system improvement will be involving our court officers, particularly our affinity court officer groups like the Guardians and others, actually going out into the community to also be part of our implementation structure and creating relationships in the community about law enforcement and what it means to be a court officer, and also building human resources pipelines to the court officer examination, et cetera.
Frequently, we have, anytime I'm doing a trial, it's not unusual that we're going to get a call from a school, a high school, or a middle school, that they're going to bring an entire class, into the courtroom in order to observe what's going on. Those are the things that break down the system, so that they can understand, and it's not so frightening. But also you have to consider the fact that when a group of children from one particular area comes into the courtroom, if all they see are just white people, and then they're not convinced that they have any place, in that area as well. So it's something that has to be a whole bringing together of all of the portions of the courthouse.
Judge Edwards?
Sure. I think it starts in all aspects. Many of my esteemed panelists have hit on it, but I think when we're looking at it, we have to look at what makes a person a good candidate to become a judge. And I think we need everybody's assistance to do that. So it may start with helping out with scholarships, for people of color, internships, encouragement. If you can become a part of a political club or an organization, NAACP, getting involved and asking to be nominated to be a person on a screening panel. The community organizations are often asked. It could be a housing type of community organization. You would never believe the types of organizations that have representatives on the screening panels, and it's meant to be that way. It's not the same group. There are always some certain types of rules, like maybe if you've been on it for 2 years in a row out of the last 5, I forget all the rules, but there are a number of organizations. And if you are a part of one, and this is something you want to do, speak to the others on your board, and then you can reach out to the district leaders. You can reach out to, the leaders, like the Democratic leader, for example, in Brooklyn or in the Bronx, but whatever it is, and ask for your organization to be represented. You have to be assertive about it. It's encouraging people to do community service, serving on boards. And probably more important than all that is make sure you do your job to take a look at, whenever you need an attorney, that you consider attorneys of color. It's time to start hiring folks. We're not just sitting around hoping to get whatever we get, who's the lowest price. You have to look for good attorneys, and there are a number of attorneys of color in every single part of our profession that would love to work for you. But people need to make sure that they support in any way possible. And besides that, I think being aware, educating yourselves of what the numbers look like. And I don't want to give anybody any false impression that, if you are, Black and you appear before a Black judge, you have an advantage. But I hope that people would understand, we've been through it. We know what I guess we can better identify with some of the same issues, and we're going to give everybody a fair shot. Doesn't matter what color you are. You know what I mean? There was one thing that I also wanted to say before, and I kind of forgot when we talked about the last segment, when it went to implicit bias and how we can incorporate that into jury charges and the videos and stuff like that. That was one of our recommendations, and we got it from a number of attorneys who had come together and actually spoke to Secretary Johnson as well about it, and he did adopt it. And part of it was, what would you do? I don't know if those of you who may remember that TV show, there was a skit, not even a skit, I don't even know what you want to call it, a segment. I'm not a producer or anything, but there was a segment where they had one person who was a young white man dressed like with a larger shirt, casually jeans, stealing a bicycle in plain day in the middle of a park, with all sorts of tools, little clippers and stuff like that to break the lock, all the way to like an electric chainsaw, making all sorts of noise. And everybody was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And they couldn't lie, the people who were involved. So we told them he was stealing the bike. "Oh, well, that's not your bike." No. And then people walked away, no big deal. Then they had a Black man, similarly dressed, young, same about age group. He got stopped every single time. Every time they cleared it away and waited about a half hour, he got stopped. People called the police. People like physically tried to get involved. Then they had a beautiful young white woman try to steal it. And do you know how many men tried to help her steal the bike? They thought it was cool, lifting up the sign, helping her. "Oh, let me help you with that," and it was just so funny. What the effort is to show that video to jurors and change some of the language in it so that people understand what implicit and unconscious bias is about, and also trying to, especially in a criminal jury pool, to try to rehabilitate, allowing people to try to rehabilitate jurors who may say that they don't trust the police, or they've seen a lot in their neighborhood, they've been harassed themselves, they've read the news, seen on TV, killings of unarmed Black and Latino men, women, things like that. And that does not necessarily mean they cannot be fair on this case, but I feel like over the years, we as judges have been too quick to grant cause challenges to remove a person from a jury because they said they don't trust the police. And that should not be a reason to automatically, discard somebody from their discharge somebody from their jury service without giving them an opportunity to speak a little bit about what their experiences were, and to remind them that these officers on this case were not involved in that, and can you distinguish between the two? So we have some proposed language that we also suggested.
I love it. And so in thinking about so many of the things that you all said, one thing comes to mind is that we're asking the question about what non-members of the judiciary can do, serve on juries, right? So many people are talking about, like, I need to get out of jury duty. No, we need to serve on the jury and help in our piece of the process in terms of making sure justice happens. To your point about representation doesn't mean that you're going to override, the justice that you're supposed to get, however that's supposed to happen. But it does mean that the lens in which you look on what is happening is shifted because of the fact that you have affinity or not affinity, and representation matters in terms of those things. And in terms of thinking about some of the other pieces that you said, when you, Judge Holder, you mentioned about, having representation, making sure people see folks in the space in order to try to achieve it. When we started as a Metropolitan Black Bar Association in thinking about wanting to do a backpack and school supply giveaway, which is named after Justice Abdul Salam. We did it because, when I was the president-elect, actually, there were so many kids when I was doing volunteering stuff who would say like, "Oh, I only ever see lawyers when, something bad is happening." And right, so it was really about a community effort to say, well, let's change the representation so that we can change, hopefully, some of the output and impact that is happening community-wise when people become justice involved. Judge Holder, what you're going to say?
Well, that's with respect to going out in the community as a lot of these groups that we belong to are actually trying to do now, whether it's going to the churches or whether it's going to schools. And the difficulty of course as a judge going to some certain things is that people want to ask you questions about like cases that they have, or about things that you can't answer. So you have to really preface this quite a bit. The other thing I wanted to say really about the implicit bias is that the truly disheartening thing is that, and the crazy thing is that a lot of us, have implicit bias ourselves when we are dealing with individuals who are before us, and that's the thing that we have to be really cautious about. I mean, sometimes you might get cases in front of you where with the white person, shows up with a letter from Senator such and such, Monsignor such and such, and the person of color, may not have those kind of things, and on the other hand, that person may live in the community that you live in, and they just either robbed an old lady or something like that, and so the question, are you treating that person more harshly because they are doing something where you live, and as opposed to just making a decision on how you should handle the case. So it's a very fine line. It's a very difficult line that you have to walk, but you have to recognize that implicit bias is something that we ourselves have to deal with, and it's hard because it's something that you're generally not conscious of.
Yes, and because I'm always in the facilitator mode when it comes to talking about unconscious bias as well as anti-racism, let's not let the explicit bias go out the door, because that exists as well.
Exactly.
Right. So while we all have unconscious biases, because that's the way our brain functions in terms of making automatic responses to data that we receive, whether that data is an inanimate object or a person or a group, they're still very much in our play and in play in all the things that we do. Explicit bias, actual racism, actual sexism, and all those things that go into the disparate impact of justice when it's supposed to be provided, and in our interactions. And so it's important for me to say that out loud always, because people are like, unconscious. I'm like, yes, that's true, but there's also conscious. Judge Mendelson?
Correct.
Just to that point, I have been called upon to step outside of my comfort zone in talking about race, which is not something I generally ever thought I would do outside of close friends and family. It's just not something that I do. But with this charge, I do it. And I'm going to say two things. One, to your point about implicit bias and explicit bias, one thing that I have been saying lately, because well, it's a combination. I've been presenting a lot on these issues. And after one town hall that the Franklin Williams Commission put out the other day, put together during the town hall, a judge emailed me 2 words during the presentation, well-spoken. The old me, honest to goodness, the old me, and those were the only 2 words, and it was meant as a compliment. The old me would have just let it go. I perhaps would have talked about it with family and friends. The new me, under this new assignment of my life, sent the judge 3 articles about, President Biden talking about President Obama talking well, and Cory Booker being told that he was well-spoken. My initial reaction was, of course I'm well-spoken. I have a doctorate degree, a law degree, and I've been a judge for 18 years. If I'm not well-spoken by now, we have a problem. But I had to step back and send the articles, which I wouldn't have done. I sent 3 articles. And then we're following it up, and bless this judge's heart, asked me to meet, and now we're going to actually talk about this a little further. But what I want to say about implicit bias, it's not an excuse to, it's implicit, so I'm not responsible. And what I want to say about that is, if you step on my toe, it may be accidental, unconscious, but it hurts me and I'm receiving it. And if you keep stepping on my toe, we're going to have a problem. So I mentioned that not to put down the person who said that, but to say that we have a responsibility to have difficult conversations and to educate each other.
I mean, I almost did an amen in the middle of what you were saying, because I don't know if it's Mercury in retrograde or what, But this week I had a very similar situation. I'm on 7 boards, but one of the boards that I'm on, there's also another person of color who is a judge, who's during the actual board meeting, another board member was like, I didn't know that you were that articulate. And I was like, screech, stop. Forget an email. I said, we all just experienced racial trauma. And we have to stop right now and talk about what that means and why that happened. Because why, to your point, should a judge not be articulate? Why, to your point, should a board member not be articulate, right? So that expectation of there being less than when it comes to Black people and people of color stepping up is such a part of the history of this country and the history of this world, and white supremacy and, all of the other things. And so I had to stop that. And I just wanted to share that. I don't know what was in the water this week, but guess what was not going to be in the water? Me sitting back and letting it happen without us calling it out. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And we do need to be upstanders and to call people out and then to call them in, because again, we still have to navigate amongst folks who are different than us. And, we're living sort of receptacles of of racism. And so whether we're a part of the groups or not, we still experience that, to Judge Holder's point earlier. And so we have to do something about that. I want to, Judge Holder, were you going to say something? Oh, okay. All right. I wanted to, before I ask you about takeaways, we want to use this next time to get to some questions. I'll just say that there are some questions that were submitted anonymously that are about current litigation that I will not be asking our panelists. So feel free to go ahead and reshape the question in another way in which I can ask it, and I'm happy to do so. But for now, I will ask this question, which I will truncate, which is, what sorts of additional support for new judges of color would you love to see? Whoever would like to start, go ahead.
I think new judges of color should have there's educational training for judges who come in right off the bat, and that is judicial training school that they go in. But I think support groups that we have, such as Judicial Friends, such as smaller groups of judges who get together and actually speak to each other and advise each other as to what are the little nuances that you need to look out for and you need to be concerned about going forward. So there's always those little groups that people can people will find once you get to that level.
Absolutely. Judge Edwards?
Sure. Part of our get-togethers that we had during COVID, like with Judicial Friends, were just our members, and we just talked about it. We talked, we cried, together. We tried to support one another. As everybody knows, COVID hit us all hard. Just because we're judges doesn't mean we didn't lose family members and friends and deal with quarantining and all that. So I think supporting each other, providing a resource, and I think even pulling each other to the side when we hear something, or something gets brought to our attention that might not be too correct. We want to make sure that we can nip it in the bud so that people can understand. This is what somebody said. This is something that could affect their career or their trajectory. Making sure that we give good advice. Making sure that we ask for help. From people that have come before us. I have a number of mentors,
Right.
Including some on this panel right now. But I ask questions. I text. I get messages, of support. Biblical verses, flowers. Good morning, happy Saturday. Things like that are so important for us to support each other, because we just can't blow it. This is too important. We can't blow it by saying something, watching our social media accounts. I'm telling our fellow judges all the time, don't get pulled in when your family and friends want to talk about an issue. Ignore it. You might want to peek and read it. Don't like. First of all, thank God I don't know how to like anything. I'm not liking anything. I'm not disliking. I'm just silent. I'm not accepting friends. We have to kind of be in the internet dark, things like that, making sure that people understand the pitfalls. The people who have gotten into, jams before us, it could be for the littlest thing, and we can't make those same mistakes.
Yes. Judge Mendelson?
Being a new judge is a truly, truly amazing thing to happen to one, but it's really disturbing, isolating. There is nothing like it. You're never working as hard in your life, and it takes years to feel comfortable being a judge, no matter what it was that you did before becoming a judge. It is just that special. So the idea of needing support and attention from your colleagues, before whom you can be free to be yourself is critically important. And so we all who are the more seasoned judges need to step up and make sure that the new judges are well cared for and supported, and know that we can be reached out to support them.
I think this is a good time for an MBBA plug. For those of you who don't know, the Metropolitan Black Bar Association has an initiative called the Judicial Training Academy. What we understood was that there was a sort of a curtain or a wall in terms of information and really kind of getting the data that's needed in order to be successful in your trajectory, in your wanting to become a judge. Thank you for asking. Yes, there are applications open right now. If you go to mbbanyc.org, you will see information about how to apply to be accepted into the Judicial Training Academy. It is a for us, by us initiative that gives you the behind the scenes and the front of the scenes information about becoming a judge. And it's a part of our effort towards the pipeline. And we hope that you will all consider what I think it was Judge Mendelson who said earlier, which is, you know, we can't get in our own way. We have to really think about not letting imposter syndrome make us think that we can't do these things. Now, on the flip side, make sure you pay your taxes, because I didn't know that. I was like, oh, okay, let me just go ahead and write that check real quick in case I want to be a judge. But the point is that we are trying to afford access, and we hope that if you are not a member, you will become a member, and you will also join us in this initiative to get more people of color, more Black people on the bench. Judge Mendelson, you want to say something?
Yes, I do. Since we're on the topic of shameless plugs, one of the recommendations was of this Secretary Johnson report was to promote existing institutions. And for the court system, the two existing institutions that I'd like to promote before I leave this meeting is the Franklin Williams Commission. I've mentioned them a few times. And I also want to mention the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which is an OCA, Office of Court Administration, executive level office to promote diversity and inclusion of all types throughout the court system. The Williams Commission has had a vibrant judicial mentoring program for a number of years now, in addition to what the MBBA is doing. And I only recently became one of their judicial mentors, and I have got a wonderful mentee. And I also, and as my co-panelists, we have all informally and formally mentored many people to the bench. And there are many paths to getting support for that process. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Well, I do see an interesting question. I don't mind answering it. I know you're protecting us. I'm not that great at multitasking, but I do want to address it. If you don't mind.
No, please.
It's okay. There's a question about the impact on percentages of New York State African American jurists, particularly Black male Supreme Court justices, based on the recent decision to, certificate or recertificate 3, it says, of 49 veteran jurists. Obviously, that is a current case, so I feel comfortable at least saying that we did look at that. It's on behalf of Judicial Friends when we decided to take a position one way or another before it became a case, before the courts. And to be honest with you, it affected everybody, not just Black folks, white folks. And one thing I did learn from one of my other mentors, Juanita Bing Newton, who recently retired, she explained to us that when she first got on the bench, there were so many Black males. Women had yet to really start going in numbers, and it's a shame, but now the brothers are hitting 70, 72, 74, and that's what we're seeing. We lost a lot of Black male judges, who were Supreme Court justices based on that decision. But also we looked at it by borough. Queens got hammered. We looked at the Bronx, and we looked at it like that to see how our communities would be affected as well. So I just wanted to say yes, but it does seem to be an interesting concept that back when the judges first came to the bench, there were a lot more men than women.
Go ahead, Judge Holder. You're on mute. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
I'm now the only Black male judge sitting in all of Queens County. We've lost 4 Black male justices here.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question, which is, and I think this is for you, Judge Mendelson. Does the court system have a plan to deal with possible probable resistance to the ideals of inclusion and elimination of bias, particularly with senior or executive leaders in the system?
So I will tell you that the first recommendation of Secretary Johnson was that there be a commitment from the top. Chief Judge DeFiore has embraced that recommendation and all the recommendations, and she has made the commitment on behalf of every single court manager and court leader within the state judiciary. We have been doing some really high-level internal work, strategically planning the initial structure of what will be the plan to implement all 13 recommendations. But I tell you, just today, we scheduled a statewide meeting that I will lead of all of the administrative judges, supervising judges, district executives, court managers throughout the state to discuss this report and the expectations on every court manager to implement this report and to implement this equal justice endeavor with excellence. So we're serious about this. I say that and then I say something else. I am not naive. Everybody on this call is interested in our successful implementation of the Jay Johnson report. It will not be easy. We have been out of slavery for a shorter period of time that we've been in slavery. And 30 years ago, the Williams Commission issued a report that is strikingly similar to the report that Secretary Johnson issued. Mm-hmm. Although there has been progress. I would not be in my position right now, and the other judges and all of us who are successful on this call and in this room may not have been here 30 years ago. So there has been progress, but we need to move further. But everybody on this call wants us to succeed. I am not naive. There are plenty of people who work for the courts and who don't work for the courts that are hoping or expecting this to be a fad or for it to fade quickly. We have got to prove them wrong. Collectively, with our actions and our behavior and our insistence on continuing to try new things and to keep coming back, implicit bias training and diversity training and inclusion efforts and changes to human resources processes, all of those have been tried before. With some success, as I said, there's progress, but we do have far to go, and it's going to take a lot and different strategies at different levels. But there is a commitment from the top. Chief Judge DeFiore and Chief Administrative Judge Marks are serious about this, and they were deliberate. When there's a letter to court family that was issued talking about their plans to implement the report, and the words that were used by Chief Judge DeFiore, I understood them, but some people were concerned about it. She was very deliberate in saying that she was appointing and empowering me to lead this work on a day-to-day basis for the courts. I think she was deliberate because you can receive a position and not have the power or the resources to get something done. And I do believe that our leadership are committed to this. I know I am, and I'm pretty stubborn. I'm putting my all in this, in addition to the full-time job that I have.
Plus a full community standing behind you to make sure that you're supported. When I think about some of the things that you were just saying, and the resistance, it reminds me of when the push to get the elimination of bias CLE implemented in this state. And I have to tell you, I remember attending some of the state bar meetings and being like, oh, people are just racist. Like I live in New York City, not that there's not racism here, but I heard a lot of voices from upstate where I was like, whoa, I had no idea. And so I think, yes, we can experience and expect resistance, but we can also know that we have been a resilient people for our entire existence, and that we make things happen. And the fact that we have a vice president who is a Black woman and South Asian is such a powerful indication of the power of Black lawyers and how much we matter and how we should be supported. And so I just wanted to say that because, ooh, child, the resistance. There's a question. How do you navigate when the person engaging in the quotation mark implicit bias is in fact a person of color. I know we started talking about this earlier, but thoughts, comments about this? Anyone?
I mean, like we said, we're not immune to it.
Right.
You know, I think it's important to bring it to that person's attention. But we all have it, me included. I hate it, but now that I know what it is in the last several years, I hate it. But we all have to make a better effort to, to change our own mindset and to not jump to certain conclusions. There's nothing wrong with having implicit bias because we know we all have it. But the point is, you don't let that affect your decision making and how you respond and how you treat people and how you act. It's a part of human nature. I
Right.
mean, I don't mean to say there's nothing wrong with it. It's unfortunately something that we all have. We're not perfect people. So I think bringing it to anybody's attention, we should not be immune from being, pulled to the side and being told,
That's
like that's what we did.
that's the support system that you were previously speaking about, Erika, that that we bring people together and pull them aside and say, listen, maybe maybe you need to consider this, maybe you need to consider that. So we do that all the time. That's what these groups are for.
Do you know how many
I would
people tell me when I do something wrong? Thank God I have friends.
I will say to that, we were all raised in this very same society that taught us to devalue certain groups of people. So it is not a surprise and should not be a surprise
Right.
that we are also have to check our own biases, the favorable ones as well as the negative ones.
Exactly.
Judge Mendelson, what is one takeaway that you want attendees to know or do and follow up to this panel?
I want you all to promise me you're going to actually read that 100-page painful report and not just the blurbs about it. Secretary Johnson said he wrote every word of that executive summary deliberately because most people won't read past it. So he wanted to be very careful with that. Let's prove him wrong with that and do something remarkable and actually read the entire report. And then when you're done with that one, go back 30 years. We'll find that one for you too. Read the Williams report as well, which was groundbreaking. And also read, there's a recent report that I'm also implementing on gender bias. We didn't mention intersectionality enough tonight, and so I'll end with that. I am a Black woman. I am very, very familiar that there are layers to bias and all sorts of bias that we all are responsible for addressing. Bias against people with disabilities, bias against the LGBTQ community. There are all forms of bias that we should hold ourselves responsible for addressing as we go along the way. Thank you.
Judge Edwards?
I think for me, it's continued support, coming to events like this, giving people an opportunity to be heard. Please don't be afraid to ask your questions, share your thoughts. I mean, in the end, we're judges, but we're public servants. We're here to serve the community. Please support Judge Mendelson. She has a tremendous amount of responsibilities, and I want to congratulate her. I just read about a new one in the paper when there are complaints
know
about
about it.
biases. I can't keep sending emails congratulating her about getting another responsibility. Remember, it got to the point I had to call her to see if she was okay with all these responsibilities. But it's a humongous task, and we're here to support her and support her efforts. And I just want to thank everybody, for caring enough about these issues. Please, 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 the one takeaway is please know we're working. We're judges. You may not see us on the streets. You may not see us holding, flags and banners and marching, but, we get it. We have a job to do, and all we can do is take each case as it comes to us, not giving any preferential treatment because of color, race, ethnicity. We have to be as close to perfect as we can possibly be as judges of color. We just can't be anything less.
Judge Holden, our final minute.
Yeah, and I agree. There's so many people that are on this chat that each of you have access to so many people in your communities. I think that one of the best ways to just spread the word of what it is that we're trying to do is within yourselves. We're trying to just make everything as openly as possible and as supportive as possible. And I think we'll rely on you to do it just like we do.
So I want to thank my wonderful, wonderful, wonderful panelists for your sage words, your experiences, your advice. It's important for us to see so we can be, and I see a lot of people in the chat talking about wanting to be, so we do hope that you will apply for the Judicial Training Academy. If you are not a member of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, Shame on you. Just kidding. Please join the MBBA. It is a home for Black lawyers. There are so many homes for Black lawyers in the city, but it's one that we all need support, and we want to make sure that we support our bar association so that we can do the work as well. Everyone, please stay safe. Happy Black History, and good night to everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thank
night,
you for having
everyone.
us.
Thank you. Great job, Paula.
Thank you, Paula.
Bye.